Thank you. A very warm good evening to everyone at HPPI. We are so glad and we even congratulate all the chapter presidents as nominated by Ravi sir. And we're looking forward to spread the wings of FDPPI and make the outreach more higher and higher. Today we have with us an eminent speaker, Shreyas Parvate, who will be guiding us on the topic of data discovery for privacy compliance. Uh, Shreyas is a data privacy senior specialist with 20 years of IT, digital, cybersecurity, risk, and privacy compliance experience. He's an experienced implementer who has worked across programs, delivery, solution, design, and privacy governance. He has done certifications like CIPPE, CIPT, and DSCI certified lead privacy lead assessment. He has worked around regulations like GDPR, CCPA, Middle Eastern privacy laws, and data Indian privacy. Even working on the Indian data privacy bill. He has been a speaker and a presenter at IAP and NASCOM, and even at ISACA events. We are glad you are here with us, Shreyas, today, and we look forward from learning from you the importance of data discovery. As we know, it's important not only for improving the data quality, managing data security, but even it's important for being compliant with different data privacy regulations. So, Shreyas, we are glad that you're sharing this knowledge and giving us an in-depth view of data discovery, how it can be done for the organizations. Over to you, Shreyas, for taking ahead the session. And we can take the questions at the last. Kindly post in your questions on the chat box. Yeah, and in between, even if you all have, we'll pick it up. Over to you, Shreyas.
Sure. Thanks, Sayogita, and thanks FDPPI for this opportunity. Glad to be here and share a few thoughts on data discovery. So the broad plan for today is I'll try and finish the slides and a few ideas I want to put forward regarding how to best go about data discovery in the first 45 minutes and leave some time towards the end for some Q&A, as you suggested, Sayogita. Okay. So primarily, this is what we will be covering, the agenda for today. And I'll be speaking mostly from an implementer point of view, since I have been involved with privacy compliance programs across different geographies and also had the opportunity to work on more than one tools for data discovery. So I'll also talk about why tool-based data discovery is gaining prominence, as you might already be aware. But then what is the process exactly when one talks about data discovery, and what are the challenges and best practices? That's where I want to spend more time here. And then also try and pass some tips around tool vendor selection and stuff. While we do that today, let's be also aware that I will be speaking strictly from a tool agnostic point of view, given the position I am, and I'm speaking in a personal capacity. And these views do not reflect that of Tech Mahindra. But we will not be covering anything such as specific features of any tool. I will be giving you guidance as to how to refer to, there are some reference guides, vendor guides available. I'll talk about that. I'll also not be capturing any, giving any recommendations of tools, nor be sharing any specific screenshots from those tools. But conceptually, and by giving a lot of examples, hopefully I'll be able to cover the main grounds in terms of what are the challenges and how to overcome this complex process called data discovery. So yeah, let's jump right into it. What is data discovery? I guess most of you would be already aware, if not been exposed to data discovery in some context or another. But if in case there is somebody who is pretty new to data discovery, especially when it comes to privacy compliance, from a privacy compliance lens, this means identifying, cataloging, and classifying data, not necessarily in the same order, but looking at the data from this lens for a business objective, which is precisely privacy compliance. So the same process can be, of course, used for supporting multiple compliances for those companies who fall under the purview of those due to their geographies of operation and so on. So when we say discovering the data, why is it important? Why is it not kind of self-explanatory or a process that lends itself to ready-made material, ready-made tables, graphs, etc. to refer to. It is important because of these various aspects such as context and environment. So let's talk about it one by one. So, for example, your organization may have a lot of systems having phone numbers, but just having phone numbers itself can lend to certain different permutations and combinations. If you take an example of a office or branch landline board number, now from a privacy compliance angle, generally speaking, that's not in the purview of compliance. But the moment you have phone numbers, and obviously for large companies, we are talking about data elements like phone numbers in thousands, if not millions. Okay, so I have been exposed to companies which are literally holding millions of numbers. And in fact, one of my clients was a telco client, so you can imagine. But then also, if now turning that situation around, if that number happens to be a mobile number or attributable to home number of anybody, say a customer or employee, then that almost always will definitely fall in the compliance purview. So that is where something as simple as a phone number needs to be discovered in the context. So when I say context, obviously I'm referring to metadata that comes along with the data captured in your databases. Also, there is a minor nuance here. So when I say metadata and context, is that one and the same thing? So to my mind, context of the data is a little broader, because when you say metadata, especially when you're talking to IT folks, data organizations, metadata is something explicitly out there, the columns, the various properties of the tables and so on, the schemas. But context of the data will be broader and will also include tacit knowledge not really documented in any of those systems or even documented in process documents. So that is the minor nuance over there. Then moving on in terms of the environment, as enterprises are picking up on cloud in a big way, and in fact now it is almost established that cloud migration or cloud-based workloads is a non-reversible trend in business places. Okay, so in that context, environment also matters when you are doing data discovery. And then there are other aspects such as whether a database or it could be a document repository, how widely it is accessed versus it's having a restricted access, because that also has compliance implications. Also, when you actually get down to discovering data, finding the data in these systems, you will come across protection features which are already applied, such as masking or encryption. And then are you able to scan and discover data in those is something that's a question to be solved. And of course, nature of data itself can vary. I'll talk more about it, but it can be into structured systems and RDBMS. But we also need to discover data lying in repositories and file systems. Then there are questions to answer, such as what if my data is actually managed by a vendor or vendor managed data? So that is all the context in which the data discovery needs to be initiated, and is a very prominent part of compliance programs. So much so that I always call it in my discussions a foundational capability. What is data discovery? It is a foundational capability for a privacy compliance program. By itself, you will not find discovery mentioned in any compliance regulation in terms of wording, but data discovery is what drives data inventory, for example, and which in turn drives many other things. So we will see how. And therefore, it is an implied requirement. So moving on, in terms of specific linkages with the compliance requirements, as you would be aware, and you can relate to things like records of processing, very explicitly a requirement under GDPR. Also, let's keep in mind, doesn't matter whether you are a controller or processor, records of processing activity is required by both. So even for companies who are doing offshoring processes, etc., the BPS businesses, they will also have to support data discovery in a very organized and structured manner. It will help their compliance. Transparency principle also comes to mind, because one needs to be aware to a minute level what kind of data are they handling. It's not simply sufficient to say, oh, there is personal data in my CRM system, but what kind of personal data? So that is where the granularity, further features like accuracy and currency of data, having the latest data or metadata around the PII is important. So again, all this feeds into the need, the necessity for automation around discovery and tool-driven discovery, which I'll talk more about. So apart from ROPA, what else? So there are things like processing DSAR requests, of course, where why discovery becomes very important is there are deadlines to meet. Deadlines such as 30 days for GDPR and 45 days for CCPA. And then depending on the volume of DSAR requests, whether or not your data discovery is in control or out of control can have big implications on being, your ability to meet those deadlines. Privacy incidents breaches, again, you need to know where that data resided, what kind of protection or security controls were applied or not applied. So overall, it will always help your investigation of a breach when you have a data discovery, which is completely up to date and in good shape. It follows that this also supports your risk management efforts. The other part of data discovery, and so when I talk about data discovery today, in this session, I always include classification as a necessary part of data discovery. So I'll not be using the longer phrase data discovery and classification. It is implied. Okay, so classification, as I was saying, it's not sufficient to know just there is personal data, but what kind of personal data. So if you look at a compliance like HIPAA, that talks about specific identifiers that the service providers need to protect. And there are specific requirements as part of HIPAA. And in general, this could also be financial PII, as you can see some examples on the left-hand side here. Location PII. Nowadays, there are databases, systems, mobile apps that capture location to the granularity of latitudes, longitudes, very precise locations. Then there is biometric PII. So all this variety of PII needs to be accounted for, and these automatically become considerations and criteria for tool selection later on when you get into it. So like I was talking about this being an enabler or a foundational capability, once you have done data discovery, this is what it leads to. To my mind, it leads to data inventory, especially for larger organizations. It's hard to conceive of a full-fledged, up-to-date, accurate data inventory without a tool to back it up. It also supports data catalog. Sometimes people may use these terms differently. So I gave it a thought and tried to see what kind of minor differences are there when you refer to an inventory versus a catalog. One key difference that that I find is when you're talking about inventory, typically your starting point is given an attribute such as email IDs or credit cards. What is the count of credit cards in my database? What is the count of email IDs? How many of such data elements are there in my, across my IT landscape? Then what is the location of data? And what is the residency of data? Now, as you can imagine, okay, let me complete catalog also and then come back to the implications of location. Uh, Now, in contrast to inventory, catalog essentially starts with this is an object. So for example, this is a database table. And then what kind of PII does that table contain or that particular document contain? So in that way, there is a slight differentiation between a catalog and inventory. Uh, Between the two, it is the catalog that will also enable remediation more easily, because you will be able to take actions on a table or a document rather than take action on just knowing, oh, there are 7 lakh email IDs in my systems. So catalog is the one that is more amenable to taking immediate actions and supports that workflow. So coming back to inventory and stuff like location versus residency, as some of you may already imagine, this basically triggers another requirement that once you are clear about location of your PII versus residency of PII, you may or may not have implications on cross-border data flow. Wherever there is difference between location and residency of data, essentially that means there is a data flow happening across international borders. So you will need to take care of those requirements, especially pertaining to GDPR. Data mapping, I would say, is primarily interchangeable with data inventory, and that also supports compliance actions. So some people, depending on the organizational vocabulary, may just call an inventory as a data mapping, data map.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, I guess we can.
Or
Yeah,
you want me to, or you want to wait till you to the end? Just
yeah,
want
yeah,
to
go
know
ahead. Let's ask
a
your
little more
question.
about the location versus residency of data. Just you could
Okay.
put that what the difference would be.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. Can you say again?
Location of data versus residency of data. What is the difference between?
Oh, okay. So location of the PII, it means the location, in terms of the systems where it is located.
Right?
Okay. And residency of the data would be a residency of the individuals, such as your customers or employees.
Okay, so residency is about the individual, location is about the data.
Yeah, yeah. So for example, if your data of European residents
Correct.
is located in India or in the
Yeah.
US, yeah, yeah. So that's the, yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, okay, sure, sure. Okay, so before we jump into automated data discovery process, I think it's worthwhile spending a minute on manual, because smaller organizations which are not having a lot of IT systems or automation or huge amount of document repository, depending on nature of business, they may be okay with having manual process at least for some time while, let's say, they are scaling up. And what does that entail? That entails starting with something like an IT asset inventory, looking up your CMDB, any existing documentation that is already being maintained for the IT systems databases. It's also important to cover endpoints, especially I have seen this in one of my Middle Eastern projects, where it is a very routine thing for employees to carry data on their workstation, copies of data which may or may not be reported or encrypted. So, depending on the organizations, this endpoint thing also needs to be as part of the coverage of data inventory and not just your servers. How you can build it up? Obviously, you'll have to sit down with the SMEs, such as the data owners. The security team may have some useful guidance along with the architects in your in the organization. However, I would not recommend this if you have a multi-location sizable business. I'll try and give some criteria on my next page, but any company which is having multi-location, multi-system, multi-business segment kind of setup, pure manual process is not recommended. Yes, there will be some manual or human element in the discovery process, like many other automations, but pure manual is not recommended. So let's look at what is the complexity. Why does one need to consider automation and spend so much of money? Indeed, some of the tools available in the market may cost as much as to the tune of 1 crore for a perpetual license, or various shades of it. So why go for expensive tools like this, especially for mid-size or large enterprises? So let's look at the context in which they are operating. So very large number of applications. I'm sure you would have come across companies easily having 300, 500, even 1,000 plus applications, mobile apps, uh, and all kind of IT systems in their organization. Even mid-sized companies, it's not inconceivable to think of easily more than 75 applications, multiple databases, not just multiple databases, databases of different types, your Oracle, Teradata, SQL, MySQL, non-SQL. So many things are coming up. And each of these obviously is containing large amounts of data. Not just containing large amount of data, it's also growing pretty rapidly. And then that data may have customer PII or employee PII or vendor PII or both, or combinations of these in each of the IT systems. Okay, so for example, your vendor database may have all three types of PII. Your CRM database will definitely have employee and customer PII. So there are these further complications as well. If you look at the, just the large setups or large structures that are formed, there can easily be 10, 20 schemas under each data source. And further, that schema may have easily around 400, 700 tables per schema, where the tables have anything between 5 to 50 columns. So you can imagine if you have to do data discovery, as in document what kind of columns are pertaining to PII or not, this can become pretty humongous exercise even for let's say half a dozen systems. So the question of doing this manually is completely out of the window if you are looking at 300, 700 applications, and then document repositories on top of that, such as SharePoint. So the other aspect is the designers of these databases may not be available. They may be having other project commitments, or they might just be not part of the company anymore. Your CRM might have been designed by an architect 10 years back and who has left the company 5 years back. So it's almost impossible to really understand the CRM schemas and what columns are meant to have PII, etc., when you don't have the people who designed it, or you have absolutely limited access to those people. Unstructured data is its own thing. So, all kind of data is being stored on the systems nowadays, even cats and dogs pictures, meeting recordings, travel documents. Sometimes people can be careless to the extent of saving passports and highly personal things on their data, on their shared drives. So one needs to be cognizant of these, and it's useful to have automated scan features to detect this kind of data that exists in your organizations. Obviously, remedial actions will have to be taken, such as purging of the data, but unless you detect, it will be something almost impossible to catch hold of. So before I get into exactly how the discovery process works, I thought let me first start with a high level workflow as to how tool-based data discovery works at a high level, and then we'll get into the deep inside the jungle. So if you start from the left hand side, the first part of any discovery tool is the scanning process. Okay, so let's understand scanning for what it is. It's essentially core functionality of any automated discovery, where it will look at things like the actual data as well as metadata. So the setup starts with the yellow box here, identifying the data source details, which you have to scan. Uh, and that includes establishing stuff like whether this data source is in which domain, what kind of database is it? Is it an Oracle one? Is it sitting in cloud? Those kind of details. Also, is it behind a DMZ? Then establishing access and connectivity, checking whether there is firewall to be taken access from. Um, Once you have the access, then you start configuring the data source in the tool. There are various scan parameters depending on which tool you are using, but this is also a critical step. So while you are doing the configuration, especially first time, you will define things like classification policies and define what kind of data do you expect to find in the database. Obviously, you want to find all kind of PII since we are talking about privacy compliance, but you will still have to specify what are the 50, 100, 150 types of PII that you want the scanner to be able to detect and then report it back in the scan reports. So that configuration will always be a critical step, and I'll suggest some best practices around that also. And once you are ready to go, you will execute the initial scan, but it doesn't end there. So it will also go through at least a couple of iterations. The first part of the post-scan workflow is the self-review. So just the compliance team will have to review the results and see if things look okay. And I'll talk about false positives and false negatives in a couple of minutes. But after self-review, you may also need to do an SME validation of the scan results for improving the accuracy. And then depending on the amount of changes that need to be done, you will refine and rerun the scans. So then that completes the overall end-to-end workflow for the tool-based discovery. Okay, now let's go a little deeper into this because this is really the core aspect of the discovery tools. So how does this scanning happen? Okay, so scanning happens by setting up the various scan parameters. Like I said, one of the most critical aspect is identifying the PII, defining the classifiers, and again the terminology may vary tool by tool. Some tool companies may call it identifiers. I typically go with classifiers such as what government IDs are there, location IDs, financial PII that you are expecting to find, and generally the patterns to be matched will be readily available. So a lot of these classifiers will be predefined, available out of the box, but the tool vendors also give you ability to customize the classifiers. Okay. Then basically the scan works on the matching logic. What kind of matching? Many types are there. So one is pattern matching, which is probably the most common, where you will either look at the pattern of the data, actual data in the columns and tables, or sometimes you will also resort to looking at metadata, the structure of how the columns are defined, whether they have certain key terms such as address, for example. Then there is proximity analysis. This I will show with an example. Again, fuzzy matching is another technique. This also I will show as an example on the next slide. And one needs to be aware of the limitations of scans also. So it's not just sufficient to define scan parameters. You will need some input, some to and fro collaboration with the teams or data owners to understand if the document repositories have password protected documents. Are there certain DB schemas holding sensitive information that are access restricted? So what happens then is you have run the full scan is complete, but some important schema might be missing from the scan report altogether. So to avoid those kind of scenarios, it's important to understand what kind of setup your organization normally has. Normally, it will be available. The DBAs will have that ready knowledge, and some collaboration is highly recommended. Yeah, so I was talking about the examples. So here are some, examples. There can be many. So just discussing the various matching techniques can itself be a, very long discussion. But just to show a few examples, when you are looking at data values such as government IDs, so I have taken US and Indian government ID examples. There are specific formats which the scanners, you'll have to feed the scanners so that they will get discovered when the scan process happens. Okay, so for whether it is the PAN number or the passport number, the social security number, even your Aadhaar number, they will always have a specified format. The term for capturing these patterns, one of the most common methods is called regex, regular expression. If some of you want to look it up further, there is a link I have put in the bottom. But using regex kind of pattern matching, the scanner will look for exact match based on the format. Keep in mind, it's the pattern exact match, not the actual value, but the pattern in which the data is captured. Then there is another type of match, which is called proximity. So what happens is within proximity of a known PI attribute like full name, if you have a 16-digit number, okay, which we all know, normally refers to a credit card number, then there is a very strong chance that that number is actually a personal credit card number. Or it could be, if there is a date associated with it, it could be some critical date, such as a date of birth. So proximity match will look on this kind of a logic, and you can define rules for proximity such as the word distance. So these words need to be within how much distance of each other, separated by 5 words or 10 words. And you can also specify things like whether the word is found after the key parameter, key identifier, or before the key parameter. So that's the other type of this thing. Going to the last part of matching, entity resolution is probably the most interesting aspect, which we where the maximum value add I think happens from the tool vendors in the discovery process, and this is also where data science meets privacy compliance. Okay, so what happens in entity resolution, or what kind of problem it solves, is a lot of times you need to look at fuzzy matches. You don't have an exact way to tell the scanners as to how do I find PII. Okay, so for example, I've given the the problem of the names getting captured in different ways, but there could be dozens and dozens of other such problems of the data being captured in a in different manner across systems or across geographies. Okay, so the solution for that is using techniques such as deduplication, record linking, and so on. And of course, entity resolution is a big topic in data science, probably deserves a separate discussion, but it will be able to link the records to the same person. So the logic on it works is what is the real world object that the different entries or records are referring to, and you build it up using AI and ML by giving upvote or downvote based on the initial results. And there are techniques like graph algorithms, which also the tool vendors are employing for efficient and high performance scanning. Okay. Now, as I was saying, this is an iterative process. Why? Because in most of the scans, you will find that there is this problem of finding false positives or false negatives. So for understanding that, let's understand what is a true positive or a true negative. True positive is when the data element is given a high score or high confidence level during the scan and is an actual match, or it's a correct match. Then you say that the result found is a true positive. What is true negative is data element was given a low score and is detected or identified by the tool as not being a match, then it's a true negative. So the conditions where both of these are not true will either fall therefore in false positive or false negative. Okay, and initial scans will always churn out some false positives and false negatives, which is what you do the refinements on, and then you typically run a refinement scan. So that was the iterative workflow that I was alluding to. How do you do this? How do you minimize false positives or false negatives? Simple techniques such as just reviewing the sample data and see, whether something which is being detected as phone number is actually phone number, or it is just IP address, without the hyphens in between or any other such system number. Okay, not necessary that every 10-digit number is a mobile number. So viewing sample data can tell you that. We also know things like number series there are which are available on websites. Then you will also look at talking to the SMEs as to whether this column is meant to capture PII. And one rule that I normally go by is anything where the false positive ratio is more than 5 or 10%, there is a high chance that this has been missed by the classifier and wrongly detected by the classifier. And this will be found out during the review process. Data dictionary, normally a lot of companies don't have a highly updated data dictionary, would not recommend or relying too much on it. But if the organization has data dictionaries available and in a very detailed fashion, up to date, then by all means use data dictionary to understand what different columns mean, what different data attributes mean pertaining to that specific company. So once you have done that identification, you need to change the categories, such as move a PII to a non-PII category or vice versa, and accordingly change the confidence level. As I said, in case of documents, depending on how the tool is structured, designed, you may use a upward, downward option, or some tools will allow you to change confidence level from high to low or low to high. So then you will just do a refinement scan once these changes are done. This process is almost same for unstructured data as well. There is another consideration, how much time this will take. In general, the structured data sources will take less time to scan compared to an unstructured data source. But there are ways to improve that, since this can be a large exercise taking months and months. So few recommendations here. So only running a partial scan or reducing the sample size, especially during your pilot phase, or running only specific 5 or 10 classifiers during your pilot phase. Those could be ways to reduce the scan time, scan duration, and also quickly see what are the results you are getting. So you start optimizing for the further scans for the data system that you will pick up. In terms of a full-fledged implementations, you can define scannable windows, time windows, or you can split the scan. Basically split the scanning resources. So there are few techniques over there. Unstructured data, as I said, in terms of the matching algorithm or matching logic, it runs in parallel. And what happens is you will feed the document types such as boarding pass or salary slips to the algorithm. You can also do it as a training set, feed it as a training set rather than predefined classifiers. And then the tool, the scanner will start picking up or identifying the documents based on the data fed into it or the logic fed into it. And typically you will find that the similar documents get grouped together when you see the scan report. So all document repositories that are having salary data, all document repositories that are having health checkup data, etc., etc. Another feature some tools I have found are pretty useful is when there are duplicates, the tool will be able to tell that there are duplicates of this, and these are the path where the duplicates are found. And also show you metadata such as count of the findings. So in a particular document, how many email IDs are found? That kind of information is also available as part of the scan report. What challenges you may face is integration is one of the biggest challenge. Your scanning tool, data discovery tool will have to integrate with lots and lots of applications. Basically, literally every application that you want to scan for the discovery, and that includes your SharePoint, Slack kind of resources also, or file systems. Also, every tool will have limitation. There is no such thing as the ideal, the most perfect data discovery tool. There will be always some limitations. So understanding the impact is going to be important. For example, how the scan performance impacts your project timelines, because that I've seen something happening where what you expect will take only couple of days, and if it takes couple of weeks, then your project planning and timelines are completely going for a toss. Also account for things like data owner changes or availability issues. Sometimes if people are away people are away, and it therefore helps to know, especially for your critical SMEs, if you can have their leave schedule in advance. Also be, challenge, another challenge, I wouldn't say challenge in the sense of any wrong discovery, but more in terms of surprising findings, is that it's not uncommon to find passwords that are stored in clear text in documents. There are logs and columns having, credit card information, detailed customer profiles in columns of a database, but the architect's not aware of it. So those kind of findings, and then how that has ramifications on the remediation action to be taken, is something that you will have to take care of. Because as I said, discovery is just an enabling process. Unless you have taken it to logical end, such as reporting documents or remedial action, you are still not compliant. Some best practices here, therefore, based on the challenges faced. Uh, Always try and involve a technical architect around the integration side of it. That will save lots and lots of time. Involve the SMEs. But one thing you'll have to know, the SMEs won't know about your GDPR and whatever privacy regulation that you are so passionate about. So having things like ready reckoners of what PII means, what are the different examples of PII, can go to great length in terms of their awareness building and having more productive meetings. So what I've seen is if I budget a half an hour meeting, I am spending first 20-25 minutes of the meeting just in explaining the PII. So that kind of thing can be taken care of by having, by just being aware of this gap, first of all, knowledge gap, and then planning for that gap. Another thing is always budget for delays for around your access and connectivity. This is probably the bottleneck in terms of a project plan for data discovery. Okay, and various reasons exist. There are processes and approvals to be taken always. Some connectors may not work. Although in theory, the tool vendor says, let's say, oh yeah, for Salesforce, I have a ready connector. You will be up and going within hours, if not minutes. But moment you start implementing that on the ground, you may find, there is version difference. There are some new updates that have come on the Salesforce side or on the product side, and then the connector doesn't work. So for access and connectivity in general, you will have to plan significant time, especially in the initial phase. Running few pilot applications is also highly recommended, because that's only when you will understand, where things are taking more time, which are the aspects where you need to involve the SMEs, where you don't need to involve SMEs. So for example, if data dictionaries are available, some ready reckoners on the data governance are available, your involvement or dependency on SMEs will be pretty minimal. But if not, it will be quite significant. So things like those. Seventh one I already covered. Performance impact I already covered. In fact, for performance impact issues, especially for mission critical applications, you may have to take approvals for scanning weeks in advance. So plan for those kind of project delays when you are actually implementing a discovery tool. I thought of just coming up with this chat GPT thing to look at what is chat GPT's viewpoint regarding using data discovery for privacy compliance. Couple of key things here is usually the chat GPT talks about viewpoints at a more generic level, whereas if you are actually implementing, you can give that much more specificity and perspective in your recommendations. But yes, in terms of the accuracy, all these points are valid. Collaboration with stakeholder, or take the point around ensuring data security and confidentiality. All these are absolutely valid and accurately documented. Yeah, one thing worthwhile adding is please document your data discovery process, templatize it to the extent possible, because normally discovery is not a one-man's job. You will have to involve a team. So to the extent you have workflow documents, templates available, it will reduce everybody's overhead. And this also become, these things also become audit artifacts, compliance artifacts later on. A couple of questions I thought I'll pose for the tool vendor, if at all you get into selection of tool vendors. So look at connectors, look at what file types you want to definitely cover. What are the dominant file types in your document repositories? Uh, are there tools that does the tool support remediation workflows? So those kind of things. Let's be realistic here. As I mentioned, no tool is perfect. Also, no tool will have all 100% connectors or all 100% file types. So essentially, you will have to optimize depending on your requirements. So yeah, so discovery can take a lot of time. For me, this has, in a couple of projects that I have been involved, this took us almost double the project duration that we initially budgeted. Right? 2x the time that was budgeted. The actual was 2x the budgeted time. But is there a way to do this better and in a more decisive manner? I think yes. So this is one of my favorite memes that I sometimes use. And yeah, with that, I would like to pause, open this for questions with a quick summary page here, but I would like to stop here and open this for questions, please. Sayogita. So since I'm in a
Shreyas,
full
do you
screen
have?
mode, I'm not able to see if on chat we have any questions. So
So we have one question. I'll just read out to you. This is from Reena ma'am. She's
sure.
asking, what are the top 2 to 3 points we need to take care uh, of that are the critical success factor for program on data discovery to be successful?
So
Both is
generally, she is asking in general, what are the critical points
yes.
on data discovery?
For success factor, yeah, it's like the SAP success factors. That's it. Yes, Reena ma'am, you can unmute and even ask. Are you there
Yeah, I mean, it's a
directly?
generic question for a data
Yeah.
discovery program to be successful, which will lead to a data classification or any other next steps for the organization. What should we take care of so that the program is successful, both from a schedule and effort perspective?
Sure. So there are many things one can think about. So like I was mentioning, try and run a pilot always. That is one. Of course, the starting point is you have selected the right optimal tool for your overall effort and activity. But with that that in place, run pilots. The other aspect is if I go back to the best practices, um, uh, have the SMEs aligned to this. Sometimes there can be a tendency that the SMEs say, "Oh, you are using a tool, then why do you need meetings or workshops?" But that is where some discussion and alignment, especially a top management push, can help to put the program on track, especially in the initial phases. Because I often use this analogy that privacy compliance is like a child and it takes village to raise a child. So discovery is also on the same direction. It does take a village to actually have a successful discovery program, especially for large setups, right? So if you are anything, your company is anything in the legion of hundreds of applications and repository having lakhs of documents, obviously it's not going to be purely automation that will rescue you. I hope that helps.
Any other questions or discussions that can be taken ahead? So, Shreyas would like to even know about data lineage. The other day we were discussing, right? So, how different is data lineage from data discovery, or probably how they're interconnected? If you can let the audience know about it also.
Sure. So data lineage will be all about upstream and downstream flow of data. When you are looking at one data source at a time, you need to understand the data flow, and that's where data lineage comes in picture. And it tells you the whole data flow end to end, how the a certain data attribute is almost like flowing in the organization, so to speak. So that's where data lineage helps. But I would say it's more in the realm of data governance. As far as it can be helpful to build data lineage. One is not sure if it's commens, the benefit is commensurate with the effort if your objective is only privacy compliance. But it can be depending on the organization context. If let's say it's an organization which has never done data discovery or does not have too much documentation in place in terms of where all the data goes from different systems, which I doubt, because the people like enterprise architects, data architects in most of the companies I have come across, they would have a good sense of these overall enterprise level flows. Having said that, there is definitely value in building lineage if organization is willing to spend time and resources on it.
Great, great. And even one more question, probably, and I have an answer to it, but would like the audience to use it. Is data discovery possible with help of worksheets and with help of Excel and templates, or there is a tool that is required to do it? So, how do you see it? Is it can be done manually or it needs a tool in place.
So data discovery, what's the organization size like?
So if, for example, it's a medium and small scale, like, with 30, 40,000 employees, or probably 40,000 employee organization, delivering it to say might be 200, 300 clientele.
Okay. I would say it's going to be pretty challenging. So like I mentioned, there are several challenges. The data owners or data SMEs may not be available, where that would be one of the biggest challenges. So when you sit down with, let's say, 20,000 schemas across these applications, try to map them in a Excel file, you simply won't have the kind of know-how required to take that exercise to completion. Okay, and 10 or 20,000 columns or tables might be involved just for one or two big applications like a CRM or any customer management application. And then there can be dozens of other such applications. So it's also you're optimizing for time, right? And when you start having DSARs flowing into your organization and so on, then there are regulatory deadlines to meet. Or fines to be faced. So from that perspective, I would say manual, it's not impossible, but it's more impractical for large companies like, have something having 30,000 employees.
Right. So we have one question from Subraju sir, and he's asking, have seen some clients perform data discovery exclusively for card data. If the data discovery tool is capable of, then how much extra time is taken to discover additional PII data like SSN numbers, passport numbers, mobile numbers, Aadhaar number. Also, from a cost point of view, would it be 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times? Even Subraju sir, you can add in here.
See, in some cases, we do SOC audits and we jointly do SOC plus PCI plus ISO with some other partners also. And we saw that, there's a lot of focus on card data discovery and all. But what struck as remarkable is that why are these guys also simultaneously not looking for PII data as well? In any case, they're doing data discovery tools and all that part. The question in our mind is might as well do it for other sensitive data as well like this. And a very large company, 20,000 people, multinational, multiple locations and all that part. So I was wondering what is the constraint? I mean, is it that, let's assume for a moment that the data discovery tool is capable of doing it. You have to configure it. If it can search for card data, it can search for, other kinds of data as well, right? So, but from a time point of view or from a cost point of view, assuming that, let's say the company is already spending an X amount for, complex application architecture, multiple applications, multiple platforms, voice data, chat data, data in different forms. So already having done it for card data, how much of an effort and how much of a cost is it really extra to do data discovery for certain other PIA as well?
Sure. So I think in terms of the setup part of it, let's try and divide this problem into things like setup, price, and duration. Okay. So setup has its own complexity, price has its own implications. Okay, if you run out of budget, then there is simply nowhere to go, right? Or time could be another this thing. If you have let's say a CXO mandate that you have to be up and running and finish this by so and so date. After that, I'm liquidating your team. So are there hard constraints on time? So let's look at it one by one. So in terms of setup, I think that's a more straightforward thing there, because most of the good tools in the market come with easily 100 plus classifiers readily out of the box. 100 plus types of PII can be identified, detected right out of the box. It's just a matter of setting it up and connecting to data sources. Okay, so therefore it basically comes down to aspects like price and time. So I have seen at least a couple of pricing models, which I'm sure will be helpful for you. So one pricing model is how many data sources are you connecting the scanners to this discovery tool with? Okay, that could be one way the price is driven. The other is how much data is being scanned. So there could be price per terabyte, for example. Okay, and so therefore it will all have implications on how many data sources you want to run the additional classifiers on. if it entails scanning that much more data or that many more systems, that will impact, and how the price gets impacted. The other aspect is time. So as you know, as one can easily imagine, as you start connecting more and more data sources, the duration for the scanning work, discovery work will keep going up. And the other aspect is, if there are systems having large amounts of data, again, the scanning duration will keep going up.
But if the data sources remain the same, okay,
Oh,
and
okay,
the quantum of data remains the same, the data source, the number of applications being scanned is exactly the same. So that remains the
then
same.
it will have a minimum, it will have minimal impact.
Yeah, that's
Not
what
a
I was
significant
curious.
impact.
Yeah, correct, correct.
Okay.
So what
Okay.
we are looking at is, why the hell are you guys not searching for all the data points? Because if it is minimal, might as well do it, right?
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, then, you sell it this way internally, that, this is the reason why you should go for it. With very with insignificant impact on this thing, you will be able to do that much more identification and stronger
Yeah.
data governance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Navi, sir, you have anything to add in here? Your views, sir.
No, nothing specific, but of course, this is a very important aspect of practical privacy management, I think. See, all other rules application will come later. First of all, we should have identification of data properly classified and available for application of other controls. So I think we are going through very important aspect of data privacy. So it's a lot of practical issues could be there. Now, one thing which I wanted to ask Shreyas is, if there is a SME or medium-sized organization, now if they want to do scanning, the data holding may be large. Okay, even though we call the organization an SME from the capability of spending. Now, will they be able to do this on a contractual basis from outside the service provider? And if so, is there any additional data leakage risk which happens because we are allowing an external party to do the scanning on our behalf? In a large organizations, of course, they may own the software, they may own the scanner, run it entirely on the internal network, that is fine. But what about the other SME, MSMEs kind of a thing?
Sure. So contractually is absolutely possible. There is a discovery as a service model that is coming up, and those services might be available from the market. The other aspect that you mentioned, the leakage possibilities and how to mitigate that, right? So yeah, that can be an important consideration too. So one thing to note is, now there are tools which are capable of scanning encrypted data as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then detect that, oh, there is this column is having PII or not. So if an organization which is more, let's say a bank, small bank, which is very sensitive about this aspect, can consider encrypting the data and then using a tool which will still be able to scan and detect whether there is a PII or not. It may have limitations, like it may only call out, PII yes or no. The granularity might be limited, but there are tools that are coming up like that.
Mr. Ramesh, do you have any specific question, Ramesh?
Yeah, I just kind of posted some question. Shreyas, I think it's a good session, but maybe I'm asking a very preliminary or elementary question. Isn't it this something, as Navi said, isn't it this more of a design control requirement than digging into the data? Because at the first level, I not classified, maybe my application design itself not classified or maybe identified what is correcting PII. So why I'm going backwards and trying to fill in, dig into my database?
Oh, absolutely. So if an organization has very tightly driven change management, has absolutely well documented, up to date design documentation, where all PII fields are known, they are always updated. It does sound idealistic as I even talk about it. But if there are companies which are confident about being able to do it, do it or manage it at a design level, it's doable, and you can have less dependency on tools or automation, and just be able to do this with manual effort.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I'm asking is, again, typically you yourself mentioned, sometimes there is a false positives or false negatives about the data. Like even the 10-digit number or a 16-digit number, we don't know what is it, say card number
Yeah.
or a combination of something else. So looking from that point of view, if my design of the application and the front end itself is not strong enough, then obviously I know I keep on discovering it, but I cannot justify which is API, which is not. That's where I was coming from. But yeah, I think
Sure.
it is
So I have
interesting.
been part of companies and part of teams like design authorities, which are designing systems, etc. Since in my earlier life, I was a digital transformation consultant as well, and I have been someone who has designed online marketplaces and stuff. So what I know is when you are designing, this can be done. Initially, the documentation is super. What happens is over time, as your business requirements change, that is where the leakage or loss of control will start happening. As you start building more product lines, expand geographically, whatever reason that is, mergers and acquisitions happen. So I'm currently handling a situation where the company got taken over by a client, and now what they are doing is, a complete revamp of the IT landscape. Unfortunately, I can't talk too much in depth, but a complete revamp of IT landscape. So then how do you account for data discovery in this scenario? What happens to the data in the old organization? So again, having a up-to-date discovery and these kind of things will help a lot,
Yeah.
not just
No,
design.
right. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
As you mentioned in between somewhere, like the architect of the application is more critical. I think he should be involved tightly to get these things resolved.
Involved, available, you will find that, as you start actually doing or running these programs, availability, people start vanishing.
I
So
mean that,
how
that
do you
that's a
catch
common
hold of them?
phenomena in all large projects.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for it.
One of the other concerns, Mr. Shreyas, I know you are having a hard stop. We'll close it in a minute. Is that when you give the examples of name being, say, there in different forms and other things. So when this software actually creates a duplication and combines, let's say, Shreyas P data with Parvate Shreyas data and creates it as a single data, okay, then it may result in a disclosure of that information to one of the persons whose data has been combined. So is it a kind of a data disclosure risk which comes if there is a problem in the efficiency of this software?
Absolutely, absolutely. That is why I have said at least twice or thrice during my this thing that one should always look at refining the scan. Only then the accuracy of scan will be up to acceptable levels. Yes, absolutely. This can
Yeah.
be a concern and risk also. Yes.
Yeah, Sanjay. Yeah.
Yes, we have one more question. Probably that question even hits me also.
Yeah,
The data discovery tool as part of scan also end up storing the data either during the search or the results thrown up as a result of the search. So do these tools, the AI-driven tools, even store the data that they're scanning?
No, so actually that's easier. That's an easier answer. They don't store. Normally the scanners run on the metadata layer. Okay, and even if the scan has to look up some actual data to evaluate whether the pattern is matching or not, etc., there is a cache which will get auto deleted, and only a sample of data is looked up anyway. Let's say 100 records out of millions of records. So,
But that
yeah.
100, whatever 100 is getting selected for the scan, that also will not be stored into that particular algorithm, or it's not taking back something from that data that's
Nah,
scanning.
it's just temporary storage. Yeah, like cache. Yeah.
Great, great,
And
great.
it will go away. Yeah.
Thank you, Shreyas. Probably we have more questions, but probably we can have one more session, going more in detail, and probably we can invite some tool vendors also to tell us how these tools work, probably giving more of the privacy professionals and view to it. Shreyas, it was great having you on the session today, and it was a learning session. Probably everyone enjoyed the session thoroughly, and it was an enriching one. Thank you for joining and sharing all your knowledge, and we wishing you to join us again on the Gyan journey, or probably on the other sessions that we are planning soon.